Welcome, everybody, to this inaugural episode of Peregrinatio. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle, and I'm going to be your guide on this walkthrough of Dodona today, the site of the famous Oracle of Zeus back in classical antiquity. So let's just dive right in. So we're going to start here. Our kind of jumping off point here is arguably the most famous spot in ancient Greece, the Acropolis in Athens. You can see the Parthenon sitting here. And I want to just for us to fly from here, just to give us some geographical perspective and orient ourselves. So let's get started. So we fly from the Attic Peninsula here. We make our way up into off the beaten path up here in northwestern Greece, at the site of the sanctuary of Zeus and his oracle in Dodona. So a bit about the site. We're up here in a northwestern corner of Greece that we call Epirus. And this oracle is argued by some to be the oldest oracle on the Greek mainland, with its use, its function going back possibly even as far back as 2000 BCE. So that would be 1,500 years before the Parthenon is even built. So deeply ancient. And what we think was here way back then was an oracle that was not dedicated to Zeus himself, but to an earth goddess. And as the ancient Greek culture kind of shifted over from its kind of pre-Olympian theological system to the Olympian gods, where you had Zeus on the throne, you see a shift from that earth goddess to the main goddess. The main god on Olympus, Zeus. I'll talk more about that as we go through it. There is some evidence on site that suggests that. What you're looking at here, we're gonna walk through, kind of starting down here and make our way up through the site, following the path of more or less what an ancient pilgrim's path would have been way back when. But most of what you're seeing here dates to roughly the 3rd or 4th centuries BCE, with some Roman refurbishments and renovations along the way. As I'm sure many of you know, the Romans, as they expanded their empire, they conquered Greece and they took over lots of their institutions and added to them and renovated them along the way. And so we'll see some small evidence of that here. So the earliest inscriptional evidence that we have on site here dates back to the 6th century BCE, but archaeological explorations have shown that the foundations of the cult and the oracle date well before that. One more thing just before we dive in. If you want to do a manual walkthrough of this virtual tour and you don't want to listen to my blatherings, just click the link in the descriptions and you can walk through these one by one, or if you want to go back and take more time with each of the place marks I have designated here. All right, so let's jump in. Let's zoom down in. So if you're walking the path of the kind of the modern tourist or the ancient pilgrim, the first thing that you would have encountered here was this stadium. It might surprise learners who are new to this kind of stuff. Why would there be an athletic stadium at an oracle site? Well, a lot of these Panhellenic shrines are multi-purpose, and so there would have been, you see an athletic stadium, you see this, this theater, which we'll get to in just a moment. There were a lot more things going on in these places than just simply people coming to consult the oracle of one god or a goddess. And so this stadium here, as you can see from the Google Earth image here, and I'll have some pictures that we'll look at briefly here. There's not a lot left. You can see some of the seating here surviving on the slope. You can see a bit of the shape of the stadium down here, kind of adjacent to the modern path that you walk into the oracle. But the stadium, the remains that you see here, was built somewhere near the end of the 3rd century BCE. And it hosted an athletic festival called the Naya Festival, in honor of Zeus Naios. Zeus Naios is the persona of Zeus that's worshipped here. Just means kind of Zeus that's in the temple. Zeus, who is the dweller here, the resident. And so the Naya Festival was this festival that honored Zeus in that particular guise. And you had athletic events here in the stadium. You had musical and dramatic competitions here in the nearby theater, and this would have been a festival that was held every 4 years, just like the Olympic Games further to the south, which are much better known and much more famous. But lots of these Panhellenic shrines, and hopefully many of them we'll get to in this Peregrinatio series, had stadiums, had theaters, and hosted their own quadrennial festivals. So let's just take a look at some of the pictures here. So here you see on a bright sunny day, this would have been the stadium floor here. You can see a few rows of seatings here. There's about, I think there's 22 or 21 rows that survive that are on the same slope that the theater is built into. Yeah, you can see a bit closer here. Now we're getting into kind of the area of the theater over here, and there would have been probably a path, probably a tunnel leading from the floor of the stadium to the entrance of the theater. But yeah, this was the site where this Naya festival was held every 4 years, and continued until the 4th century CE AD, when Dodona and many other of these so-called pagan sites were shut down, as the Roman Empire, what was left of the Roman Empire, is quickly becoming Christianized. Here we see a artist rendering of what the site would have looked like. There were basically three parts to the site, we might say. That you have kind of this Naya festival portion, given over to the athletic competitions, to the musical and dramatic competitions in the theater, and then past this gate, you get into what we might call the administrative part of the sanctuary, and then the most innermost part would have been the inner sanctum, and would have been what they called the temenos, or the sacred area, and this was the location of where the oracle itself existed. More on that in just a moment. But let's move on to our next part here. The most impressive archaeological, visual, physical remaining piece on the site today is this wonderful theater that survives quite well. And at its height, you can see that a bit here, as the site gained in popularity, and you had more and more visitors, more and more people coming to this Naya festival, they would add more seating as you kind of went up the hill. You see the typical way of Greek architecture, which I find very visually pleasing, is that the Greeks tended to build these large structures in concert with as kind of the landscape presented itself. And so there was probably kind of a natural curve in the hill here, and they just they formalized it, they hollowed it out, and kind of built the theater to kind of integrate it into the natural landscape. They didn't have the light, cheap, long-lasting cement that the Romans invented, which allowed them to build these massive freestanding structures. They had they had to quarry that kind of the heavy stone and marble from local quarries. And you start building that up as a freestanding sculpture, it gets too heavy and it collapses. And so they use kind of the natural landscape to build these things into the curve. And this wonderful theater is a great example of that. So at its height, it probably could have seated about 17,000 spectators. And like I said, in talking about the stadium, it was used for dramatic and musical competitions, largely for that Naya festival for many, many centuries. Now, the Romans took this over, and as Romans do, they carried on the musical and dramatic competitions, but we also know that they used this for gladiatorial games, or at the very least kind of animal fights, a kind of a spectacle that the Greeks tended not to do. And as I zoom in here a little bit, you can see kind of these, lack of a better term, kind of these drains down in the subterranean part. Archaeologists have found the remains of bulls and boars. And so that's evidence that these were likely the principal animals that were used as animal fights, pitting them against each other, or maybe pitting them against a human opponent as well. But they found them down there. And so, yeah, a nice example of a Greek theater, but refurbished and reused and repurposed in many ways by the Romans. Let's take a look at some pictures. So here you see another, here's a more 3D model representation. So we're coming down this way into the site. You can see there's the stadium, perhaps an opening here, which would have led you to the backstage building of the theater here. Yes, built into the hill, but was also some supporting ramparts here. So it's kind of a mix of a freestanding and more kind of naturally presented theater here. Here's kind of a shot from the floor. There you get a sense of how well preserved the seating are. There you see some of those drains used for the Romans for cleanup, I suppose, to put it in as least crude way as possible. Here, just kind of from the other side here, you can see kind of as you go up the aisles, it just kind of empties you out right onto the top of this kind of small acropolis, if you want to call it that, of the sanctuary of Dodona. Here, a surviving arch from the Roman era, part of the kind of the little bit that remains from the back building, kind of the stage building that would have been right behind the orchestra. All right, moving on. All right, so now we enter into what we might call the the administrative part of the site. This is not a this I mentioned this just because there's some speculation and mystery about what was actually housed there. In fact, there's still lots of questions about exactly how these buildings were used. Once you get past the stadium and once you get past the theater, we'll see that there's not a lot of remains beyond kind of foundational stones and outlines. And so there is a lot of kind of guesswork, educated guesswork, but guesswork nonetheless of what was here. So there seems to be the remnants of some building kind of between the ramparts of the theater here and this council house, the Bouleuterion, which we'll get to in a moment. That's been suggested that this might have been a place where the priests of the site would have been housed while the oracle was open. Let's just take a look at a couple of pictures here. So here I'm talking about number 5 here on this plan, kind of between the theater and the larger council house. Here you see it from a kind of an aerial shot. We're not exactly sure. The oracle was not an oracle that was open year-round. We know that there was a cadre of priests called the Seloi, which while the oracle was open would have lived on site and conducted business and conducted everything kind of happening in the sacred area. But we don't know exactly what that looked like. Where did they live? Where did they stay? It might have been in this small building here, which presents itself maybe of having something like a dormitory to it. Next up, we have the Peregrinatio, which is, again, you find these things in lots of these Panhellenic shrine sites. Like you find this in the Agora in Athens. You'll see this in Epidaurus, the healing sanctuary of Asclepius in southern Greece, which I hope to make on the subject of another one of these virtual tours. But here you can see not a ton left beyond kind of the foundational stones here. So this would have been a building that was also built around the 3rd century BCE, like so many of the buildings that you see the remains of here. This building consisted of many rooms, had an extended Ionic colonnade off in this area over here that led to one of the main gates of the sanctuary, we think. And its function was what Peregrinators were kind of throughout the Greek mainland and in kind of government sections of a city or the administrative part of a Panhellenic shrine. It was a dining hall. And we also think this is probably where the kind of official archives of the site were kept here. Kind of back to that recreation. So here, again, what it may have looked like at its height, kind of the main building here, kind of the square part, kind of around maybe an open central peristyle courtyard, and then an extended colonnade in the Ionic order here, down here to the south, near maybe where there was another kind of entrance gate to the sanctuary. Here you can see not a lot left. The ravages of time and repurposing of the stones has taken its toll, but you can see kind of the outlines of the many buildings here, and maybe kind of part of an open courtyard in the middle here. Not much of that Ionic colonnade that's stretched out to the gate here from the ground level. Yes, not a lot to see. Not a lot to see here, but. Certainly by comparison and looking at this in conjunction with other sites, we can at least guess its function. Next up is the Bouleuterion, the council house. And so this was a very large building, and this is very likely where the local sanctuary council conducted all the site business. The remains, like the Peregrinatio, date back to the 3rd century BC. Again, like it also, just basically the foundations of this survive. But we can tell that the structure was more or less kind of one giant room with maybe kind of another, like a second story built as it kind of merges into the hill over here. A large meeting room with a roof that was supported by 6 very large Ionic columns. Here we are. Here again, like the theater, it was kind of built into the hillside. It may have had kind of an upper register here, but the main part was kind of this large roofed room with a columned porch on the front of it. Here's an archaeological plan of it, and so it's built roughly around in the same kind of way that you would see a sacred temple being built, a large kind of column entry porch, and then kind of a meeting chamber in the center. and we can see kind of the stumps or the bases of 6 large columns that would have held up a massive roof. Yeah, here you can see it in relation to the theater over here, some of those ramparts. So again, maybe that priest's house was somewhere in here. And here you can see the stumps of some of the columns on the entry porch. And you can see as it kind of builds into the incline of the hill over here. All right, now we enter into what we might call the temenos. This is the sacred area of the sanctuary, and we start to see a number of buildings dedicated to particular gods and goddesses, heroes, and we'll even see the remnants of a later Christian church that was built on this site. And so the first thing we come to is this very small temple of Aphrodite. This dates back to the 4th century BCE. And we know this was dedicated to Aphrodite because of a number of clay figurines of the goddess herself were found at the site. No real inscriptional evidence, and whatever cult statue that was there is long gone. So why Aphrodite? Why is Aphrodite here at an Oracle of Zeus? She is the daughter of Zeus. And Aphrodite has a complicated genealogy, but one of the principal traditions is that she was a daughter of Zeus and a goddess called Dione. And you can see Dione here is also a goddess that is very important for this site. And so we think Dione is kind of a Hellenized, a Greekified version of the earth goddess, the original earth goddess, to whom this oracle was originally dedicated before Zeus takes it over. And so the Greeks kind of gave her the name Dione, and still incorporated her into the cult here, but she's no longer at center stage in the oracle. And so Aphrodite, as a daughter of Zeus and Dione, kind of keeps the whole thing in the family. And so, well, more on Dione in just a second. But this is this very small temple of Aphrodite. So here in the recreation, this little very small temple. Here you can see from the remains. Again, I don't have a person standing here for scale, but I don't think you need one to see how tiny this temple was. A small kind of columned porch with a central cella here, with likely there was a cult statue of Aphrodite that obviously does not survive here. Maybe a little bit better light. You can see it, and you can also see it in conjunction with the theater. Here's the Boulaterion. We're walking down this path and getting us deeper into the sacred part of the sanctuary. Next up is another temple to another goddess, a temple of Themis. And this too, like the previous temple, dates back to the 4th century BC. It's directly adjacent to the main event on the sanctuary. This is the site of the oracle, which I'll say more about in just a moment. Themis is a goddess that you see, you often see respected and venerated at other shrines whose main deity is someone else. You see there's a shrine to Themis in the area of the Acropolis in Athens. There's a temple of Themis very likely in Epidaurus as well, that sanctuary of Asclepius. Her name is usually kind of translated to be something like law or justice. So she shares this kind of connection with Zeus, with justice and divine order, but she also has deep connections with oracles and prophecy. In addition to that, so she has those kind of associations with Zeus in terms of justice and law, but she makes more sense here as a goddess associated with oracles, right next door to the main sacred house of Zeus. In myth, she and Zeus together are the parents of the 3 fates, as well as personifications like eunomia, a good law, dike, justice, and eirene, peace. And so she has lots of connections with Zeus, and so thus her proximity to the main temple makes some sense here. All right, to our pictures here. Her temple was likely a little bit larger one than the temple of Aphrodite, just up the path. But not much left. Just a few foundation stones to give us some idea of the kind of the size and scope here. There you can see a little bit better. So this is the path we're coming down. This would have been the front of the temple. You can see a bit of the remains of the porch here, and this would have been a central cella, where again there likely would have been a statue to the goddess. Here's a fairly typical depiction of Themis. This is not an ancient sculpture, but you see kind of the sword and the scales. She is someone who enforces equal justice. Though I would say Themis here on site at Dodona, her connections to oracles and prophecy is the principal one. All right, on to the main event. This temple here, this area would have been the focal point of the vast majority of people visiting the site in antiquity. This was the oracle site, and so people would have come here and they would have put their questions to the god and hopefully receive an answer that would make them happy or give them guidance and give them wisdom. Now, there's a lot of mystery about exactly what happened here, and the sources that survive don't necessarily agree. What we see here is that the oracle, the sacred house of Zeus, Zeus Nios, remember Nios means Zeus is in the house, Zeus dwells here, was a rectangular sanctuary here that was mostly an open-air sanctuary. There was a kind of a back building here that may have functioned as a dormitory for the priests on hand who conducted the oracle. We're not exactly sure. I'll show you some recreations of what it would have looked like. It went through different versions and renovations. It kind of grew and became more elaborate as the years went on. But the basic function was the same. There was a kind of a square, kind of open courtyard. And the most sacred spot, as you can see, this big tree is still there. And this was thought to be kind of the original sacred oak tree of Zeus. Like many other gods and goddesses, Zeus has kind of a representative in the animal world. The eagle is kind of his familiar in the animal world, and you have a representation in the plant world, and his is the oak tree. And so those connections between the oak tree and strength and durability, in many ways, I think kind of go back to the oak tree's connection with Zeus. Now, what happened here? Like I said, is we're not exactly sure. One of the stories that survives is that visitors would come. They'd come to this entry porch here, and they would give their questions to the priests. It's very unlikely that visitors were allowed inside this sacred courtyard here. And one of the wonderful archaeological treasure troves is that archaeologists have found a number of these lead tablets, these kind of small pieces of lead, where the questioners would inscribe what they wanted to ask the god. And so they've kind of found them kind of littered on the sanctuary. So we have some idea of the kinds of questions that people would ask. I'll say more about this when we take a brief look at the nearby museum, where lots of these lead tablets are on display. But the process went something like this. And so the visitor would give their question to the priest. And then the priest would listen for the kind of the wind rustling through the leaves of the oak tree, and this was thought to be the language of Zeus. And these priests were trained in interpreting those things. And then they would, once they kind of heard and interpreted kind of these tongues of the god through the whisperings of the oak tree, then they would give their answer to the questioner. Very few of these answers, if any, I'm not exactly sure, survive. We have a number of their questions, but I don't believe that the priests, when they gave their answers to the questioners, they wrote these down. Or if they did, they simply don't survive. So I'll say more about this as we kind of look through some of these pictures. So again, here's our recreation. So this is again the site as it may have looked at its most elaborate. So there's a large square courtyard, this blob here. There's the oak tree of Zeus. There's your entry porch, and then perhaps a back building that housed the priests on site here. So here's one artist recreation. There's other evidence that here it's a much simpler, kind of a natural courtyard, kind of following the geology of the site. Some sources say that the tree was ringed with bronze cauldrons, and not just listening to the whispering of the leaves through the trees, but you'd also kind of listen to kind of the hollow rings of the cauldrons, and that the priests would hit the cauldrons like a gong, and then they were touching each other, so that would make kind of this metallic ring that would kind of an eerie sound that was also supposed to induce the trance or be part of the language of Zeus. There's others say that the sacred acorns of the trees would hit these cauldrons as it fell from the tree, and that was also supposed to be the language of the god of Zeus. There's other texts talk about kind of the sacred doves that live in the trees, and their cooing was kind of this, speaking of Zeus, others kind of bronze wind chimes like things were hanging from the branches. And as the winds, passed through the leaves, it would kind of, give that, kind of eerie wind chime sound. And that was also interpreted by the priests. And they would, give, Greek to that. That would be the answers to the questioners. Here we see it getting a little bit more elaborate, kind of a low foundational wall. In the back corner, we have, again, that building that might have been for the priests. Here we're getting more structure. Here it's kind of a columned but still open courtyard. Here's our sacred oak tree and that same back building here as well. And here's a recreation of, again, what it may have looked like at its most elaborate, again, 3rd century BCE. Which is arguably when the oracle was at its height. So here you have kind of a more elaborate, column porch, and then also that simple back building is also looks like almost like a little mini Greek temple back here. Here's what it looks like today. This is the back of the sanctuary. There's still an oak tree growing there, where that original sacred one did many years ago. So this would have been the front, so the questioners would have come here and probably wouldn't have come further than the porch here. And then back here you can see some of the foundational elements of that back building that the priests would have stayed in while the oracle was open. Here's more of the front corner. So here's that front porch. Here's the oak tree and the back building that you can see in relationship to kind of the slope of the Acropolis up here, and then the path that would take us, past everything that we've looked at so far. All right. Beyond that, we have a couple of temples of Dione here, and so there was an older kind of earlier temple here to Dione that is now kind of being swallowed up by the trees and the slope of the hill here. A newer temple just down here was dedicated to also to Dione, a little bit closer to the main sanctuary over here. So Dione, like I said, is likely a Hellenized version of the Earth goddess. That was the original cult oracle deity that was consulted at this site before the Olympian structure kind of came in with Zeus at the top of the food chain there. Dione in Greek, even though it doesn't look like it at a glance, if you put the names Zeus and Dione next to each other, it looks like they're completely different words. But if you kind of break down kind of the etymology, Dione in some ways is just a feminine form of the same name for Zeus. And so Zeus becomes kind of a masculinized version of Dione, or Dione as a feminized version of Zeus. In some ways, they're kind of just two halves of the same whole. And so, like I mentioned earlier, she and Zeus together in myth are the parents of the Aphrodite that you see in most of the myths in which she shows up. And so this oracle here is part of a larger family affair. All right, so you can see on this recreation, the old temple is not there. I have my empty circle here, but it kind of gives you a sense of its position. This is the new temple of Dione here. Not much else. Not much is left here. Just a few of the foundational stones. A lot of this stuff is, again, the ravages of time, of course, thousands of years does its damage. But we also know that, when the site shut down, a lot of these stones were taken away and repurposed and were built for other things, likely by many people who had no idea the function of these buildings that they were plundering. Right next door, we have the new Temple of Dione. Not much else to say about it. This is like a small 3rd century BC temple dedicated to the same goddess, very similar in size, in scope, and certainly function to the old temple that we just looked at. Here we can see again right next to the Oracle site, the sacred house of Zeus. Survives a little bit better than the old Temple of Dione. But like the temple of Aphrodite, like the temple of Themis, what remains just kind of the outline of a small porch and an inner cella, which again likely would have housed the statue, the cult statue of the goddess. All right, just a couple more things to get to here. At the kind of far end of the site, there's a temple and an altar to Heracles, or as his Roman name Hercules is more popularly known. Same guy. And so that Heracles, why Heracles here? Well, Heracles was one of the more famous kind of demigod sons of Zeus, and one of the most, if not the most, renowned hero in the canon of ancient Greek myths. And so he's a son of Zeus and a mortal woman by the name of Alcmene. And like I said, probably here, kind of keeping it all in the family here. And Heracles is a renowned son of Zeus, but also one who was mortal as well, and so perhaps more approachable, more easy to connect with for a human visitor to the site. So on a recreation, you can see it's kind of the last building here. You can see the little altar, the foundations of which survive over here. Heracles, his son, gets a much bigger temple, you can see, than Dione, than Themis, and then Aphrodite over here. Not much left. A few foundational stones. Again, this is the temple of Heracles over here. The remnants of a Christian church, which I'll talk about in just a moment, are just a little bit more up the hill, and in some ways overlap the remains of the temple of Heracles. Here's another angle here, kind of a tree growing on site. This is not a kind of like a sacred oak or anything. This is just nature having its way and taking back what it will. And then right next door here is this Christian basilica. This was built much, much later. And so if you know your kind of your sweep of history as the Roman Empire incorporated Greece, as it expanded, after Constantine, it fairly rapidly became more Christianized. And you start getting into the 4th and 5th centuries AD, CE, you start to see a lot of these, from the Christian perspective, these pagan festivals and Pan-Hellenic sites and oracles starting to be shut down. And that's exactly what happened here likely in the 4th century. This Christian church was built here in the 5th century AD or CE. And in some ways kind of, I don't want to say replace the oracle, but this is a phenomenon you see in Italy, you see it across Greece, is that as Christianity kind of becomes in power, for lack of a better term, the early Christians sometimes would recognize that a site like Dodona was sacred, and it was holy, and now they consecrated underneath the banner of their god. And so this Christian basilica here, it was built from the ruins of the previous oracle. So a lot of the stones that we find in the Christian basilica, or you can see from this aerial shot, there's not a lot left of that. But a lot of the stones from the nearby temples were taken to build this Christian basilica. It didn't last very long. There was a Slavic invasion of this area in the 6th century AD. Which destroyed the church, and then after that, the site of Dodona was abandoned for good. All right, let's zip over to the nearest kind of largest city. There's this wonderful town of Ioannina, which let me just back up a little bit. You can see it's on this nice kind of inland lake here and such. It's a university town. Unfortunately, kind of the Google Earth images here where we're going don't survive very well. It looks like kind of a bunch of like a farmer's fields here in pastels. It's just that the Google images and satellite images isn't great. Maybe in an updated version we'll see this a little bit better. But in that nearby town of Ioannina is this nice, wonderful little archaeological museum. Here's its exterior, and here's where most of the finds from Dodona are on display. I just want to, just for the sake of time, I don't want to dwell on this too long. I just want to show you a couple of things. But if you should ever make your way to Dodona, the site, I mean, the site is wonderful itself. It's way off the beaten path. Maybe you can even tell that from some of the aerial images. It's well off the tourist path. If you're going to Dodona, you really want to go to Dodona. But I highly encourage it. It's a beautiful spot. It's not heavily trafficked, and so if you go there, chances are you're going to have that most of the place to yourself. But if you do go, I would highly recommend also going to Ioannina and visit this museum, because it'll just kind of bring all of this stuff together and tie it all up. And so a number of figurines of Zeus have been found. So here we have Zeus as the sky god. This always strikes me as fun. It looks like he's kind of chucking a giant ear of corn here, but that's a stylized thunderbolt. So as you might expect for an Oracle of Zeus, that there are lots of remains dedicated to that particular god on site. What I find the most fascinating, again, I'm not going to dwell on it too long just for the sake of time here, but a lot of this stuff is very easy to find online. But my favorite room in the museum is this display of these lead tablets where we find these questions that were written. And this is what kind of takes it out of, for me, kind of out of the realm of myth and narrative and epic and makes it real. And we can read the words of people who traveled over the centuries to this oracle and wanted an answer from the god, whispering his voice through the trees or through the doves or through the acorns or through the bronze cauldrons, however it might have worked. And so in this room, they have a number of these on display with some translations below. But yeah, you can see kind of they vary in size, even the type of lead you can see from the color is different. But they found these things kind of folded up and rolled up and kind of discarded on site. And the questions run the gamut. They run from what you might expect. They're kind of the big questions of state. Ambassadors from city states to the south. Places like Athens and Corinth and such. Asking questions of colonization or going to war. But there are also questions that are very, very personal. People asking about lost items, or the one I have here. Unfortunately, you can't see the Greek on it too well, but you can see the translation down over here. And so this is someone who asked the oracle, "Na nymphaudo alein," which is, should I take another wife? This is likely someone who had lost his wife, maybe perhaps she died. This is and asking, should I get remarried? I would love to know what Zeus had to say to that. Like I said, the answers to these questions don't survive. We have a better kind of record of kind of oracular questions and answers, perhaps at Delphi, further to the south. And the Oracle at Delphi, I'm sure many of you have heard of that one as well, dedicated to the god Apollo. Apollo is better known as an oracle deity, and the Oracle at Delphi is by far the most prominent and popular one. So we have perhaps a bit more information here, but this is still kind of just wonderfully kind of on the ground, make it real type of experience with the oracle here. But we don't know what Zeus had to say in relation to this question. I don't know what this guy did. He get remarried? Did it work out for him, or did Zeus say, no, it's better for you to stay single? All right, our last little flight here takes us back to the oracle set. We get kind of one last aerial shot of this. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below if you have questions, if you want other places that you'd like me to go to. I'd love to hear from you. But I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully see you in the next one.